Cha.
He was alive, right? Let's hang him in effigy.
Right. The hell with that. Let's hang him right here in Boston.
Though, and a lovely person. Then, if I ever see her again, I'll tell her you said hello. And she'll say, who? And I was like, right, of course. You weren't even part of that conversation. Mike LaPlante is here with us, everybody. Mike LaPlante. I said yesterday that you've got another show that you're doing. We weren't talking about the Easy Mac podcast. We were doing a little history with the Easy Mac podcast. You've got this other show now that's about technology that's hundreds, nay, thousands of years old. What's your show now?
It's called the Average Wine Enthusiast. The Average Wine Enthusiast. It's easy for me to say. Yeah. And I got the inspiration for the name from Victor Cacao because he had the typical Mac user. Right. I always liked that kind of average Joe kind of guy. It makes it so I'm not pretentious about wine. And I think because wine has that kind of, I don't know, it has a reputation for people who really like wine, who are really into it. Those people are pretentious. So I just thought I would name it the Average Wine Enthusiast. And I really am an enthusiast of wine. It's something that I have a passion for, especially because, like you say, it's got a very long history. And something like that is still around, that uses a lot of the same techniques as they did literally thousands of years ago. That fascinates me that something is still around that we're still using the same way.
Where do people find it?
You go to the YouTube.
The YouTube, you say?
Which you can find that at youtube.com.
Okay.
And you look up The Average Wine Enthusiast and you'll find me there. I do about 2 shows a month,
okay.
I would say I produce. And a lot of the impetus also for doing this, not just for my passion for wine, it was also the secret desire that I had to learn a new piece of software, specifically Final Cut Pro.
Really?
So I always wanted to edit video. For whatever reason, I was always drawn to that. I went to college and I took broadcasting that was part of the program that I took, and I always enjoyed that, where I had big clunky cassette tapes with LED numbers running across. I always thought I was playing with reality. I could put this with that, and I was always fascinated with that. And now with all the stuff that we have now, it's much easier, and you can be more creative with what you're doing. So I was digging it, and I feel I've come quite a long way since when I first started, which I almost dread watching the first episode that I did. And I tell people, whatever you do, don't go to the first episode. Just move on from there.
Right. Start with season 2, and then once you love me, go back to season 1.
Yes, that's it.
How many episodes are you up to now?
That's a good question. I was numbering them 4. Up to a certain point. No, I started in January of last year, so okay, do the math.
All right.
It's close to 30.
Very cool. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So people should look for that. We got tech stuff to talk about now. We'll remind people later in the week. By the way, I have a couple of other questions for you too about wine. Maybe we'll pepper those throughout the week. In the meantime, I want to talk about what's going on with Apple versus the developer community. Now, let me stop me right there.
Let me stop me.
Yeah.
Stop me now.
I don't think it's actually the developer community that Apple is arguing with. I'm curious how much of this you've been keeping up with and what your general take is. And forgive me, because I didn't really give you much to go on there. There's the Coalition for App Fairness came out, I believe, on Thursday, the exact same day. Who'd have thunk that Apple came out with its whole thing about here's why we're good for developers and here's why we're good for consumers. The Coalition for App Fairness is a bunch of, small, scrappy companies that you've never heard of, like Deezer and Epic Games and Spotify. I will say it's interesting to see Prepare in there. Do you know the Prepare story?
No, I don't.
Okay, Prepare is a company that I think does like a grocery shopping app. It's Prepear. See, so it's cute. It's not like preparing because they're also shopping for, produce and things like that, but it's Prepare.
Gotcha.
The reason we all know about Prepare, those of us who do, either we work for them, we use their service, or we've heard about the lawsuit between Apple and Prepare, because Prepare has a logo that is reminiscent, let's say, of Apple's logo. It's a pear.
Okay.
It's a simplified pear with that little leaf hanging off the top in the same direction that the little leaf hanging off the top of the apple, the simplified Apple logo, is as well. Oddly enough, Apple had whatever to sue them to protect their mark, which of course now
was there a bite
like,
out of the pear?
No, there's no bite out of the pear, but it still looks. What? It looks enough like it. Please, this was done for that. I'm sorry. I'm not on whatever jury. I wasn't in any boardroom where they were deciding it, but this was done for that. This was done so that people go, oh, like Apple. And then when Apple sues them, they have the gall to say, how could Apple do this to us? Well, you chose a logo that looks pretty much like the Apple logo. Not exactly like, but again, evocative. We saw Apple one time go after New York City. The Big Apple.
Yes.
We saw Apple one time go after the Big Apple because it thought one of the logos it was pursuing was too much like that one. And Apple prevailed, I believe, in that. There's no way Prepare didn't know what they were doing. There's no way they didn't know what they were doing and what they were getting into. But anyway, these are some of the companies that are actually part of the Coalition for App Fairness. Have you had a chance to look over their stuff? Have you been following this whole, quote, fight, end quote, between developers and Apple? What's your take?
Absolutely. I've been following it. This is something that's been a thorn in the developer side since Steve Jobs uttered the terms. 30, and we want 30% of everything that is sold in the App Store.
You think that was a thorn in their side then?
Well, I would assume that a lot of developers looked at it as another opportunity, but it right off the bat, though, the pricing got all wrong, I believe, and what people's expectations were from these apps and how much they should be valued at, what kind of value should be attached to this new thing, because we never really used apps. Yes, we used programs on our computer, and I think the two melded together after a long period of time that we put the same sort of functionality in our heads that it's very similar to computers on our software on our computers, which we're used to paying anywhere from $25 to $100 depending on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So as this has all sort of matured, I think that Apple's terms should have changed with the changing times. That's kind of just my opinion. That the 30% thing, I feel that was probably something that they felt they had to do to give the perception of value to the developers to use the App Store, for one thing. Also, it was something that at the time, they felt that they needed the revenue to help them get this App Store thing happening. Apple didn't always have trillions of dollars or $1 trillion in the bank.
Right.
And then there's that whole aspect of it as well, that Apple is one of the richest companies in the world, but yet they're still sort of across the board charging 30% to developers for selling stuff in the App Store.
Over 100,000 apps or updates are submitted and reviewed every week. Last year, Apple rejected 150,000 apps for privacy guideline violations. This year, Apple removed 60 million app reviews that it thought were spam, and the company has rejected more than 1 million apps over an unknown amount of time for illegal, unsafe, harmful, or objectionable content. The thing that's happening today, that's happening right now, right? And the thing that is kind of interesting to me is everybody's like, well, I understood charging 30% back in the day, but now the whole thing's set up, so why should they be charging anything? I mean, there are still costs associated. The data centers that they're building and the infrastructure and all that stuff. I mean, these are all things that are still happening today that, something's got to pay for, right? I understand Apple is rich. I want them to make everything free. I want the Mac to be half price. I want the Apple Watch to cost less. I want the iPhone to cost less, but that's not what Apple is doing. How is it the developers then think, and forgive me, it's not the guy sitting in his basement working on an app in the middle of the night who's making this noise. It's Epic Games. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they are an Epic company. They're big. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. They're not, I don't know. I hear what you're saying, except I feel like I feel like there's a reason for the 30%.
There is a reason for the 30% for the Epics out there, possibly. But Epic's story has a bit of a twist to it as well, because they also own the intellectual property that other developers use so that their games will run a certain way in the App Store and just run in general, right?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about getting rid of Unreal Engine, I think Apple did overstep on that. I feel like Unreal Engine is a tool that Apple should go ahead and allow in the store. I mean, as far as what they're doing with Fortnite, though, the whole thing of, because that was the argument that was made by, I just realized we actually should have talked about this yesterday, because I believe their next meeting in court was Monday, as people hear this. So a lot of what we're talking about now could be moot. Let's move away from the Epic thing and just sort of talk more about the app stores in general. Because the other thing that I think about, I mean, if you read the Coalition for App Fairness website, they want things like to be able to run their own store inside the App Store. It honestly just sounds like they want, by virtue of the fact that they will have made a program, they want to be in the App Store. And they want to be able to charge for it themselves rather than having Apple run that and run the payment system, And there are a couple of things about that. I trust Apple. I don't know that I would necessarily trust putting my information in the Epic Games site. Okay, probably the Epic Games site, because Epic is huge and Epic doesn't want to lose money or lose people's information. Then again, Twitter didn't want to lose people's information, and it did. Equifax did not want to lose people's information, and it did.
Whoops.
So far, Apple has been trustworthy with this information. When I'm making the calculation of do I want to buy an app, the question that I'm asking is, do I want to spend that money on that app? Do I want to use that app? Do I think I'll actually use that app? Never in there is the question of, and is it safe to give my information to these people? Or will my payment information be safe? Because Apple has spent years fortifying that reputation. And so far, they haven't taken a hit. I mean, if there's a day where we wake up and all of our payment information has been stolen from Apple, then we're going to start to have real questions again. But right now, that 30% gives them legitimacy. The other thing really quickly that I wonder about, if Epic, we're playing nice with Apple right now. If Epic wasn't fighting with Apple, if Epic came out with a brand new game, Epic would be on the front page of the App Store, right? Epic is Epic. Epic is who they are, and they will always get that kind of attention. What I don't hear Epic saying is what they're trying to do would do for the small developer that's never been featured anywhere, nor can they be. Now, Epic is not saying that the App Store needs to go away. They're just saying all the rules in the App Store need to change. But if Apple is no longer getting its 30%, what's Apple's impetus for trying to find small developers and raise them up? Because you then also look, what Apple gets for that 30% is an incentive to go out and say everyone can code. Apple gets an incentive to go out and say you can develop and you can develop and you can develop, because one of those three people that they point to may have the next Fortnite, and Apple's going to get 30% of that. I would like to think Apple was just being altruistic and saying everyone can code. But I mean, there's a bit of investment that's going on there as well. Apple is putting out all of this curricula so that people can learn. Some of those people will come back. They will feed back into the App Store, and that will, give Apple an extra 0.01 penny for their investment. Except, once you're talking about a company as big as Apple, even 0.01 cent plus 0.01 cent eventually ends up being real money.
Sure. Yeah. What do you think of the idea that Apple scraps the 30% thing and just creates a scale of sorts for different levels of, or different tiers of developers? Start new, start fresh, make it seem as though, and they may be actually doing this to, push away the negativity towards their app store, but to set up this type of scaled system, depending on what type of developer you are, what your revenue is. There's got to be certain criteria, I know, to follow a certain scale, but that just seems, to me, that just seems like a logical way to not necessarily solve the problems, but at least it'll appease some people.
I guess. I mean, they're sort of doing that with the whole video thing that where if you're a premium video, whatever. I mean, I read all the hoops the other day, and those people only have to pay a 15% cut as opposed to a 30% cut. Maybe. I mean, there's a simplicity about the way the App Store is set up. I mean, 30% is 30% is 30% seems like, you know, it eliminates some of the confusion, you would think. And then when you introduce special plans or special, you know, incentives, I mean, that adds confusion, but I don't know. It might be a good way to go.
I think if you keep it simple, it's something that could work, and it would also possibly appease some of the developers out there. And so at least it appears to be more fair, because I've heard people argue that there really is no other setup in as far as this type of thing goes, where you're offering your place for me to set up it's a platform, let's call it, and this is what you're going to charge me for all the services and everything else that goes along with this platform. The amount of 30% is not charged by anybody else who's in a similar type of situation. And the fact that it's Apple who's actually charging the 30%, it's not a company that really is trying to build up capital or anything. It just seems double hurting, I guess.
They're absolutely trying to build up capital. But hang on a second. Hold on. Because Google also charges the 30%. One of the points that's brought up repeatedly is the fact that before the App Store, before Steve Jobs stood up and said, you know, App Store and 30%, how you got yourself onto like a Palm Treo or whatever passed for a smartphone at the time was a completely opaque process, and they were normally taking about 60%. I mean,
is that right?
That is the stat that I keep hearing from everyone. Yes, I've read that in several articles. And the thing is, that's the other part. We all sort of forget. And I'm not saying it was like the Dark Ages, although it was kind of like the Dark Ages. I mean, certainly what Apple invented for developers with the App Store was revolutionary, not just because it got you on the iPhone, but because because there were clear steps on how you got in. And as long as you didn't do, you know, certain things, you were there, and you got a much bigger percentage than you could have gotten before. The problem is, though, that was 12 years ago, and 12 years in internet time is like 70 years ago, and nobody remembers what a cluster thing it was to get yourself onto a smartphone. And now we're just like, you know, why should you have 30%? I mean, okay, you're giving people a safe place to buy this. You're giving sort of your seal of approval. You're making it incredibly easy for the consumer. You're giving me exposure to 1 billion devices, but what have you done for me lately?